Orion, the new Giga coaster coming to Kings Island, will be opening this spring and probably the most talked about new attraction for 2020. Ever since this roller coaster was announced, many enthusiasts have been, well, unenthused with the ride stats and layout. Orion is going to be one of the smallest Giga coasters to date. With a height of 287 feet and a track length of 5,321 feet, it's not hard to see why many are not overwhelmed with joy. Orion's layout is basically right out of the B&M playbook, offering very little fresh new ideas. So I have this idea: what would Orion look like if I had the opportunity to design this roller coaster? To make things fair, I have kept my redesign within the boundaries of Orion's current stats. Anyone could redesign this coaster to make it significantly taller and faster, which would, in theory, for some, be considered a better ride, so I will do my best to keep my redesigned coaster similar to the ride current stats. Let's take a virtual ride on my redesigned version of Orion. Both versions feature a first drop of about 300 feet. I think my version is a tad taller, but it still maxes out at 91 miles an hour. The first change we come to is the wave turn. This turn is currently the most unique element on Orion. It's possible that the wave turn might provide some vertical airtime, but I expect it to be very minimal. In my version, I turned this giant wave turn into a giant outer bank turn. This element now delivers a good dose of sustained airtime. The turnaround element will now be converted into the tallest inversion in the world at 205 feet. Okay, I know I went a little far up the reservation with this element, but I was thinking, one of the biggest things missing from Orion is that the coaster doesn't have any sort of hook. Because the ride doesn't break any significant records, Orion should depend more on a strong, unique layout, but unfortunately, Kings Island went with the safe route. It's not a bad layout because it's been proven, but it's unoriginal. Featuring a giant inversion on a Giga coaster would not only turn heads, it would push the boundaries of what we would expect on future Giga coasters. Now, I know that a giant inversion on a Giga hyper model by B&M may not be possible with their current trains, so I did create a backup version. Instead of a giant inversion, it's just another turnaround element that features a little dose of airtime, but nothing too radical. Both versions feature the same strong G-forces during the turnaround part. In the original version, after the turnaround, Orion flies into two airtime hills. The first one is a high-speed airtime hill which stays low to the ground, and the second one is a more traditional airtime hill like on other B&Ms. The ride ends out with a helix and a turn to the left, then a brake run. The infamous long brake run, but more on that later. My version turns the speed airtime hill into a high-speed turn that features some laterals and actually a little airtime. The second airtime hill is very similar to the original version. Instead of a helix, my version features an overbank turn, a small airtime hill, a high-speed turn, another airtime hill, then the brakes. This second half of the ride was the hardest part for me to nail down the layout. With a track length of 5,321 feet, it was challenging to come up with something that was exciting and also sticks within the confines. I can see why B&M went with a simple helix because unless you're going to go straight to the brake run and literally build the shortest Giga coaster to date, there's not much else that you can do that pads out the ride time. My ride layout goes slightly over the original track length by just a couple hundred feet. It was extremely hard to squeeze everything within that distance. I could probably tighten up a couple turns and shrink some of the airtime hills, and I would probably manage to drop the track length under that 5,300 feet, but I felt being a couple hundred feet over was acceptable. The original brake run on Orion stands a whopping 83 feet off the ground. When you think about that, there are roller coasters in the park 7 to be exact, that don't even break that height. Racer, which is located right next to Orion, stands 88 feet tall, barely cresting over the top of Orion's brake run. B&M is notorious for creating some of, if not the longest brake runs on the planet. Both Fury 325 and Leviathan have very long brake runs, and the reason for this I think is capacity. It sounds weird, I know, but since the brake section of the ride is so long, it allows ample time for more trains to dispatch, keeping the trains in constant motion outside of the loading and unloading section. Personally, I think it's possible to shrink this up without harming capacity. I'm no engineer, and maybe there's another reason here why the brake section is so long, but if Orion were to shrink this section up, it's possible that they could squeeze in another short pop of airtime. In my version, the brake run is not as long and stands about 55 feet tall, so shorter to the ground. I do wonder why this brake run is so far off the ground though. I'd love to know more about why B&M designs long, drawn-out brake runs like this. If someone has some great info on this, please feel free to share. Alright, let's look at the side-by-side comparison of both versions. As you can see, even though my version is a couple hundred feet longer, both versions cross the finish line at the same time. I know my version might not be 100% accurate, but I think that we get the picture. I think my version might be more intense and possibly unrealistic with the inclusion of the inversion, but the original Orion design might appeal more to the average guest. I think we learned from past projects that being too intense will be favored by the enthusiasts, but less popular with the general public overall. Well, that was my redesigned version of Orion. Let me know which design you prefer in the comments below. As always, please subscribe so you don't miss out on more great content coming your way by XscreamThrills.